Welcome to the Hunt Test Hobo podcast, your place for truckside chats and insights into the retriever game. Whether you're just getting started or you're a seasoned handler, this podcast is another resource for tips, tricks, and insights from both the amateurs and professional trainers' perspectives. Each week, we'll dive into the nitty-gritty of retriever training, sharing stories of success, overcoming challenges, and forging stronger bonds with our dogs. This is the Hunt Test Hobo podcast. I'm Chris Rudd, your host, fellow retriever enthusiast, and student of the game. Let's dive in. Welcome to another episode of the Hunt Test Hobo podcast. I'm your host, Chris Rudd. Hope you're all having a fantastic week. It is 90 plus degrees out there in Illinois today. I don't know where the heat came from. I was running a hunt test this weekend. It was beautiful. We got 2 finished passes with Baby Autumn. Felt really good. And then all of a sudden the heat showed up. And it was like overnight. It was just boom. But I guess we've been waiting for it to finally get here. So now I got to start training in the mornings and doing all that good stuff. I hope all your dogs are staying cool and being safe out there. I'm going to do some breakdowns, not in this episode and not in the next episode that's released, but coming up soon. I'm going to be doing some breakdowns of some setups that I've seen at both the last 2 hunt tests I ran and the field trial that I ran, and just kind of break down some hunt test setups and why they're difficult, and the field trial setups, why they're difficult, what the judges are looking for, because I feel like there's a lot of folks out there that are listening that would love to see those breakdowns. And I'm going to do it with some visual diagrams. I'm going to try to do my best to explain it on audio, but it's going to be great. It'll primarily be for the YouTube audience, or it'll probably be best to look at it on YouTube for the folks that are watching over there. So let me know if you guys like that, and look forward to sharing all that information. Before we jump into this episode, I want to thank all of our sponsors. First of all, thank you to Purina Pro Plan. Thank you to the fine folks over there for sponsoring all the retriever games. And I was really excited. I saw they were sponsoring the hunt test that was going on this week. And I got my 2 sample bags of 30-20 and kept me going all week for the dogs because I, once again, forgot some food. So, always great when Pro Plan helps us out. So if you're looking for a great competitive food, check out Purina Pro Plan. Thank you to retrieverfoundations.com for sponsoring this episode. If you're looking for a great retriever puppy program, use discount code HOBO, H-O-B-O, to get 10% off. And we came out with a new way for you to get discount codes for litters. It's now all digital rather than me sending you some papers with discount codes, so it might be a little bit easier for folks. Check out retrieverfoundations.com and hit me up on Facebook Messenger, or give me a call or whatever. There's a bunch of ways you can get in contact with me. If you got a litter that's going to hit the ground, we'd love to get those discount codes digitally to you to help the puppies that you're breeding have the best start with the Retriever Foundation's puppy program. Thank you to huntemup.com, supplying all the great retriever supplies out there for us, that need the good stuff. I've been using their really affordable bumpers. I've been using those lately. Love them. They're great. If you're looking for some bumpers, check out huntemup.com. And last but certainly not least, thank you to Iowa Hunting Products and Man's Best Friend Calls. If you've recently lost a dog and you have their ashes, you can send in those ashes to get a custom duck or goose call made with a picture. And there's a lot of things you can custom design with them. And check them out at mbfcalls.com and get a goose or a duck call. So with all of that, I'm going to set this episode up really quick. So I listen to a few podcasts out there. I listen to all the retriever ones that are out there. And I also love the Ducks Unlimited podcast. They are putting out tons and tons of episodes. And about a year ago, I was struck by one that I listened to as a 3-part. I think I mentioned it in one of the first, or in about a year ago in one of our podcasts. And our guest today is Craig Koshyk. Did I get that right?
Bingo. Very
Bam!
well done.
Yes, first time ever I got a name right.
Nice.
So, Craig, welcome to the podcast. Thank you, my friend.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, Craig did an awesome episode on with DU about the history of the Labrador. And I knew at that moment when I saw that, I was like, at some point, I'm going to reach out to Craig and I'm going to try to get him to do an episode where we can dive a little deeper into certain things that I sat there listening to the podcast and I was like, man, I want to know more about this part. And then I want to know more about this part. And I was like, I could probably sit down with Craig for like 10 hours. So I don't know if Craig's got 10 hours today. Probably not. But I'm looking forward to diving deep into the history of the lab. So, Craig, let's do this thing.
Well, there's nothing better than talking dogs to someone who loves talking dogs. So, yeah, I mean, we could literally go for 10 hours. I mean, I started, really my journey to discovering dogs, in particular pointing dogs, started 30 years ago. And I haven't stopped. I mean, it's just been 24/7 since then. It's the most fascinating thing I think anybody could ever get into, from my point of view, anyway.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about your history with dogs. And honestly, like when I was looking at Facebook, it looks like you're kind of doing a lot of different things with, I saw some music stuff, some photography, you're writing some, give the listeners a little bit of a background of who Craig is.
Well, I think the very first thing that you want to know, especially, lab people, is that I come from and I shouldn't say a long line of hunters. I come from a line of hunters. So I live in Manitoba, central Canada. My mother's family is from Iceland. My father's family is from Ukraine. So I'm a typical, descendant of settlers here on the prairies. And they came here, about 100 years ago, really. So the history doesn't go back that far. And you have to imagine that 100 years ago in Manitoba, when you got 8 or 9 or 10 hungry kids around the table, well, there's one thing you're going to do. You're going to hunt a lot and you're going to fish a lot. That's just to feed the kids. So I come from a background. I mean, I was born and raised in a city, but my parents and my grandparents, well, they basically eked out a living by fishing on Lake Winnipeg and hunting around that area. In fact, my grandfather and uncles worked for Ducks Unlimited, sort of on contract every so often. Ducks Unlimited would come up to, it's called the Lebo-Netley Marsh. And anybody who's into the history of Ducks Unlimited will know about the Lebo-Netley Marsh because it's one of the most famous marshes in North America, or at least was at that time. And they would actually guide hunters. And some of those hunters had labs. My family never had labs. They only had farmyard dogs. Most of them went by the name Dog because he didn't even bother giving them a name. And then when Dog passed along and you got a new one, well, the new one was Dog as well. And their job was mainly to bark when a coyote was in the yard or to help maybe herd the occasional cow. But that's the most important thing, is like I come from the point of view of a hunter, of someone who is basically obsessed with the pursuit of game, but with the use of dogs to connect me with that game. And again, coming from this particular culture and coming from this sort of relatively short history in North America of only, let's say, 100 years or so, it was about food. It was about putting something on the table. It was about the game, about the ethics, about the pursuit of and the sport of it. But really, at the end of the day, it was all about game and putting meat on the table. And so when I started looking into dogs, well, it wasn't until I was much older. In fact, when I was younger, I was the lab. I was the retriever. I was my dad. My dad would take me out hunting. He'd shoot a duck and go fetch it, boy. And I always kid that back in those days, we didn't have chest waders. I mean, they might have existed, but I don't know. I started back when they had like hip waders, And for some reason, my entire life, now I'm 6 foot tall. I wasn't always. I was a little bit obviously shorter when I was a kid, but for some reason, throughout my life, the water is always at least a half inch taller than whatever wader I was wearing, So I would wear hip waders. And of course, the water was that much higher than the waders, until nowadays we have chest waders, which is great. But I was the dog. Basically, we didn't, again, my ancestors, my grandfathers and uncles, they didn't have the time or the money or the wherewithal to get a dog. Dogs were expensive. They were expensive to feed, especially a purebred dog that you actually train, that you spend time. Like how much time do you have not, lifting bales of hay or fishing on the lake? I mean, you're eking out a living there. You don't have a ton of time. So dogs were sort of an afterthought. They had them, but they were just barnyard, sort of farmyard dogs. But all my life, I loved them. I loved dogs, and I always wanted one. I moved to Quebec to study at university there, and that's where I met my wife. And we traveled a lot. We actually moved. We lived in Europe for a little while. We lived in Quebec. We lived in Manitoba, back to Quebec, but always in apartments and condos. And we never had a dog. But I told her, and she agreed, because she loves dogs as well, that the minute we get a fence and a backyard, we're getting a dog. And I was lucky. I got a very, very good hunting dog, a Weimaraner, which is a rare, rare thing. I mean, people will go, no, Weimaraners, they're all over. Yeah, they're all over. But good hunting Weimaraners, they're not all over. They are quite a rare, variety within that breed. I was lucky enough to get a half decent dog, and I fell in love with that dog and the idea of breeds and the idea of where did the breeds come from? Did a committee of people sit down one day and, set out a list, right, this is what we're going to do? Or did it happen more organically? And if it did, why did it happen that way? And where did it happen? And if it happened over there, well, what from over there is still in the breed today? So with the Weimaraner, it's a German breed. I started investigating other German breeds. I would go to the local library and look up books, or I'd read magazines. This is pre-internet times, by the way, the ancient history. and I would find information that was interesting on the one hand, but on the other hand, after reading through several books, I would find massive gaps in the history and also contradictions. One book says this, another book says that, and another book. Man, I read stuff in magazine articles, especially written by people who had clearly never seen those dogs in their life. They were just pulling it out of their, derrieres. And so I decided, well, I need to learn more about these breeds, and I want to write about these breeds. And so I put it upon myself to think, well, look, I'm not going to write about these breeds just by repeating what so-and-so said in their book or what I read in some article. I'm actually going to go meet breeders. And you know what? If this dog is from Germany, my wife and I love traveling. If this dog breed is from Germany or Italy or Slovakia or England or wherever, we're going there. We're going to travel there. We're going to meet people who have dedicated their entire lives to breeding these dogs. I want to talk to experts. So over the years, I eventually became an expert at finding experts. That's what I know how to do now. I know how to cut through the crap. I know how to cut through the spin. I know how to find the people who walk the walk and talk the talk with their dogs and have proven track records. And so when they talk about what their breed is and what it's supposed to be and how to train it and how to live with it and how to use it in the hunting field, those are the people I listen to very carefully, and I try my best to record their words and their information and then transmit that to my readers. I mean, first of all, it was for me. I just wanted to learn this stuff. I just wanted to know this stuff. But eventually I got to a point where it's like, look, I got so much stuff. I need to share this. So I wrote books. I wrote one book called Pointing Dogs, Volume 1, The Continentals, and it focuses on all of the breeds that come from continental Europe. So, everywhere from France to Germany, Spain, Holland, Denmark, all over Europe. And then my second book, which came out recently, it's called Pointing Dogs Volume 2. And that one is all about the dogs from the United Kingdom and Ireland. So basically setters and pointers, the English pointer and the 4 setter breeds. And they've been doing very well. And that really is my lane. That's what I know most. But now, over the last probably couple, 3 years, I've been diving down into that rabbit hole that is the retrievers. And you can't go into the retriever breeds without, the massive amount of information about Labradors, because they are the number one retriever breed. They are the number one breed of all breeds in many countries around the world, let alone hunting dogs, let alone retrieving breeds, just dog, period. They are right up there at the top of the list in so many countries. And so that's basically what I've been doing recently. Otherwise, yeah, I have other things that I do. I am a professional photographer. That's what I did for a living. I used to run a vocational school where I would train professional photographers. And also I dabble in music just because that's what I did when I used to have hair. And and over the COVID years, I had sort of let that go over the years because I was doing other things. But during the COVID years, I decided, well, I'll go back to my drums and I'll learn piano and I'll write songs. And yeah, that's what I did. That's what got me through those bleak COVID years, was just writing weird music, basically.
Yeah, very cool. Well, I love that. And what I was most struck by when I listened to the podcast that you did with DU was just how thoroughly it was clear that you weren't just like, hey, I heard these things and I'm just reciting them to you. The depth of research that you have obviously done is impressive. And what I want to understand is, like you say, like, I'm an expert at finding the expert. Who were some of the folks that, you know, really impressed you, or that you learned a lot from while beginning to write the book on retrievers?
Actually, Chris, I don't really want to name names at this point.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
And the reason I do is because, and even in my books, what I do is I never mention living breeders. Unless I quote them directly. So-and-so I sat down with this and this breed, and he told me or she told me this and that. Because I don't want to come off promoting anybody's line or anybody's sort of approach to things. So if we could kind of just skip that part.
That's fine.
You could ask me about in general, and I could talk in general about some of the people or some of the things that I've learned. Yeah.
Yeah. What were some of the things in general that impressed you as you were doing your research on the retrievers?
So there's one fellow in particular, and I actually write this in my book, in the first book on the continental breeds. I was in the Czech Republic checking out this breed called a Český Koshyk, and it's like a German wire-haired pointer or a poodle pointer. It looks similar to that. And there was a fellow who was a geneticist, and his name was Dr. Dostal. He's now passed away, but I interviewed him, and my wife and I interviewed him and spent the day with him. And this guy, again, 60 or so years in the breed, knew everything about the breed in and out. And as we talked to him, at first, he's a very analytical guy. He's telling me about all the statistical stuff. He had done all the studies and the genetics and all this sort of stuff. And then I asked him about specific dogs or about some of his fondest memories in the field hunting over some of these dogs. And all of a sudden, his face changed. And after the interview, both Lisa and I looked at each other and said, "Did you see the sparkle in that dude's eye?" And it was like, and I write in my book, I said it was almost as if he'd become a young man again. I mean, this guy was an older fellow, and all of a sudden the sparkle was there. And it was a spark that I had seen before in other experts. I'd seen it in other people. And I imagine that some of your listeners and even yourself, you've seen that. And you probably, I was listening to your intro and you're talking about the achievements of this last weekend and that sort of enthusiasm that comes out. Well, that to me was I knew I was on the right track. I knew that I was talking to the right people, that you could tell that there was just something still, no matter how old they were, how long they'd been in the breed, there was still something in it that was just like a kid at Christmas. And that is really what I pursue in the description of these dogs and in trying to understand them. I've always wanted to know that. Why is it that our dogs are just so deeply, dug into our hearts? Why do they occupy a space in our brains and in our minds and in our lives that no other creature, no other person, even in your family, occupies? There's some special place within us. And that to me has been the big mystery. And that's for me, that's always the one that I want to figure out the most is how they got there and why are they so important? And what are the ingredients? What are the elements that really allow them to get in there? Because we made them. Dogs are not natural creatures. They are completely man-made, and we made them to serve us. But they serve us far beyond fetching a big old goose. They serve us far beyond, curling up and soothing the crying child in the morning. They go way, way deeper than that. And that's really what's the most fascinating part about this entire journey for me.
That's great. I love it. Do you feel like you're getting closer to understanding why?
Yeah.
Can you describe it, or is it too
I can
too
describe
hard?
it. I can tell you a couple of insights that I've had. One is that the further we get from the natural world, the more value we put on those creatures that connect us with the natural world. We look at previous breeding practices, and any breeder, any hardcore breeder, people have been in it for years, and people who've researched this, and even some of the folks that are listening that might be of the older and even older generation, they know the truth of where our gun dogs came from, and they came from cultures in which most of the hard work was done by horses. So people saw hundreds, if not thousands of horses a day, and they would see dead ones. and people lived on farms or they lived off the land. So killing a chicken for supper or, seeing the neighbor's pig, on the barbecue a week later was just sort of a natural part of our existence. We lived side by side with the circle of life and death. Now we're getting further and further away from it. But our dogs are the ones that can actually allow us to access it. And I'm not talking necessarily just about the life and death of the hunting circle. What I'm talking about is the fact that we live in cities and towns and we are far removed from what is actually going on around us. It's almost as if we got our eyes on the ground and the stars in the heavens are, above our heads and we're not even looking at them. And here's this dog that allows us to look at them. Here's this dog that connects man with the natural world. I always remember one of my favorite sort of fables. Some of the native Indians around here, or, in part of their history, they have a similar story whereby the great creator of the earth was, busy creating everything. He created man and all the animals and all the mountains and everything else. And he said, okay, look, I'm almost done here. But man, you're going to go over here, and animals, you're going to go over here, and I'm going to take my hand and I'm going to chop the world in two. I'm going to make a big canyon between man and the animals so that you're never together, that you're always apart. And just as his hand came down, the dog jumped over to be with men.
Yeah.
And I remember that. And that's one of the insights that I've gained, is that really, no matter what the culture, and again, I've seen these dogs, pointing dogs anyway, all over the world. And I've talked to people all over the world. I talked to a fellow not more than a week ago who runs big, high-powered field trial pointers in Japan in field trials. I talked to guys in South Africa, in Algeria, Pakistan. I spoke to a fellow who still uses nets to capture migratory quail with his pointers and setters. And the universal thing is that the dog is that link. It's that link between civilized, quote unquote, men and women or people and the natural world. And then the other thing that I've come to sort of realize or come to understand is that even though dogs are synthetic creatures, dog breeds in particular, dog breeds are simply an idea with four legs. I've said it over and over. They're just a concept that a group of people in a particular place, in a particular time agree upon. They say, right, at some point in time, the dog might have been sort of a type for 100 years, 500 years, or 50 years. But at some point around the establishment of a kennel club or a club that is for the breed, they go, right, this is what it is. It's this tall, it's this color, this is its name, this is what it's supposed to do, etc., etc. But they all come from wild creatures. Dogs are basically wolves. You take your lab and your neighbor's chihuahua, you put them on an island for 1,000 years, you come back, you got coyotes, basically, or wolves, or sort of prototype dogs. They're no longer labs, they're no longer Great Danes, they don't look like a terrier, they look like a wild dog is basically what they have. So they have that wildness within them. And when you think about it, how did those wild dogs become domesticated? And the old idea was that at some point, the caveman grabbed a little wolf puppy and raised him up and eventually developed a line of domestic dogs. But that's really not what our current understanding is. Our current understanding is that they basically domesticated themselves. As man became less nomadic, as man became more of an agricultural being and more sedentary in little villages and small towns and eventually cities, well, they threw all their crap outside the city walls or outside the camp walls. And what does a hungry wolf or a hungry coyote want more than human scraps? Well, that's a buffet right there. So they're going to get there. And the ones that got closest to men, the ones that could tolerate that closeness, that were a little calmer, that weren't so wild, they ate better. And they had children that had that same genetic predisposition of being slightly more open to human contact. Over thousands of years, they became very easy to domesticate, and they would even curl up with them. They would follow the hunters on the hunt and warn them if the enemy are coming or if there was game close. So there's that sort of wildness that we took within those dogs and we made it to what we have today. We've really sharpened it into exactly what we have today. But I asked myself, why do humans tolerate them? I mean, these wolves that eventually became dogs were getting fed better. They were healthier. They were stronger because they had more food. And their children or their offspring were healthier, and they had that same genetic tendency. So we could see the benefit there. The benefit for men was, well, you got a pack of wild wolves outside your place and some other tribe from somewhere else comes to steal your stuff. Well, they're going to bark, they're going to howl, they're going to make a noise to their early warning system. They might lead you to game to hunt. So there was some benefits. But what was the benefit of domesticating them? What was the benefit of going that extra step and bringing them into the home, into our living room, and feeding them and really specifically going out of our way? Well, my theory is this. All animals look for an advantage. A mosquito looks for a place on your skin that it could take its probe and proboscis and stab you and grab your blood. It's looking for an opening, okay? Germs and viruses look for an opening. We breathe them in. They come through our ears and eyes and nose. They're looking for ways to get into this host, to get into this. My idea is that dogs saw an opening, or those proto-dogs, those semi-domesticated wolves, they saw an opening. And that opening wasn't like a mosquito in the pores of our skin or in the, or a virus through our nose, our respiratory system. It was in our hearts. It was in the fact that humans have a ginormous amount of empathy. Humans are empathetic social creatures. When we see something in trouble, especially who could resist the big eyes of a baby or a crying baby? Anybody, I don't care who you are, you're going to look to that. Somebody falls, you don't even know them, you help them. We are empathetic creatures. So we especially have a lot of empathy and patience with young babies. The human species is one of the few that has offspring that take 18 years. Well, nowadays, maybe it's 30 to leave the home.
Yeah.
Right? Like, and anybody who's, well, there's my boys. Anybody who's had children will tell you that it is the most joyous time of life when they're first, let's say 10 years, but it's also the hardest time. These things take a lot of attention, right? They require a lot of care. We are a monogamous species in general, so that's why, because it takes two to raise a child. It takes two to raise a family. So humans are pre-programmed to have a lot of patience and a lot of empathy and a lot of love and care for things that are dependent on us, things that are fragile, and things with big eyes and things that make certain high-pitched noises. So as dogs got closer and closer to men, those dogs that had bigger eyes, floppier ears, that made higher pitch whiny noises, just like a child. Well, those are the ones that we love. And let's face it, man, give anybody a puppy, the first thing they do is pick it up and hold it like a baby. And so I think that it was a strategy, sort of a unconscious strategy in the wolf creatures that became ours, that they knew that there was this gaping open door in our hearts, that if they could just be a little bit like our babies, if they could just be a little bit infantile, oh yeah, we're going to open up that door. They're not going to eat scraps outside the house. They're coming right into the living room. And they burrowed their way so deep into our heart. And I came across this theory as I was mourning the loss of one of my dogs. I've lost buddies. I've lost family members. I've lost a mother. I've lost people super close to me. And I got to tell you, man, losing a dog, and all you people who have lost one, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about, hurts like nothing else. And I'm not going to say it hurts more than losing your best buddy or a brother, sister, or parent. That hurts bad. It's just a different type of hurt. But it's just as profound. It's like literally losing a physical part of your heart, like a chunk falls off or gets ripped off. You can feel the physicality of it. And I believe that's because dogs have succeeded in burrowing their way into the deepest recesses of the human psyche and the human heart, like no other creature on the earth, like none other. And so there you go. After all these years, I've become a dog philosopher, I suppose, and that's basically what I've come to the conclusion is that dogs are basically our connection to the natural world. They are a creature that lives deeply, deeply inside of us and is basically a mirror to our own selves.
Yeah. Well, I can already tell, Craig, this is going to be a longer episode.
Well, there you go.
I love it. All right. So quickly on this one, and then I want to jump into the history of the Retriever breed and talk about the St. John's Water Dog and all that. But first, when you said the Indians came up with that, the split and the dog jumped over, what kind of dogs did they have? Like, do we have any understanding of what type of dogs that they kind of had? Was that just pure that, the wolves were just the wild wolves were breeding to their domesticated dogs and all this was just kind of happening, or were they doing any, like the Native Americans, were they doing anything kind of strategic with their types of dogs?
Now, I may be corrected in that fable I told about, with the maker cutting his hand. It might come from a different culture, or it might come from several cultures. It's just that I live in an area where the native culture is very strong here. We have the very first, our premier of this province, which is like a governor, is the very first native, we call them First Nations people or Indigenous people. So he's the first Indigenous leader of a province in Canadian history. And so he's a cool guy, man. I mean, he is a dancer from his tribe, and he actually does what's called a chicken dance, which is a dance based on the sharp-tailed grouse. So it's the very famous one. If you ever think about, the Indians dancing with the drums going and the guy's got the feathers and he's doing the actions, he does that. So whenever I think of these ideas, these big grand philosophical ideas, I naturally tend towards the Native American or Native Canadian ways. But they did have dogs. They had them for various reasons. There are very few cultures in the world that didn't end up having dogs after a while. It's still debatable where the first ones came from, and we're finding more and more information every year. And in fact, we keep pushing the date of the earliest domestic dog further and further in the past. Every year they add another few thousand years to it, But here in North America, 10,000 years ago, when the first indigenous people came across the Bering Strait, or what we think is the theory of the day, they had dogs, and there were dogs that developed with them. Now, did they have specific breeding programs? No, not like we do, because nobody did until about the 1800s, really. Yeah. The modern dog is a very modern creature. But they did have dogs, and they had them for various reasons. Again, these were people who were living off the land, and they were nomadic for a large part of the tribes in North America. And they would have them to help them tow things. They would have them, again, as a warning system. They would have them as help in the hunt, especially in the bison hunts. The big bison hunts, they were useful. There were tribes on the West Coast that had certain types of dogs that had very woolly coats, and they would use them to use as yarn. They would use their fur as yarn. And they would also use some of the dogs. Some of the dogs were basically just like they were everywhere in the world where you find dog cultures. There was a certain practice in certain circumstances of actually using them as a food source. Obviously, you're going to use them to work for you, but if push came to shove, well, yeah, I mean, you're going to eat them. So they were around, but and then there's also that question of whether or not they contributed to, since we're talking about labs, did they contribute to the Labrador Retriever's genetic makeup? And it is certainly possible, but it is not likely. The dogs that were around in Newfoundland and Labrador in the earliest days of the development of those breeds were typically dogs owned by certain tribes of Indians that were there at that time, or indigenous people at that time. And those indigenous tribes were not super connected or even didn't even want much to do with the white man at the time. There wasn't a lot of trade there. Where I live in Manitoba, it's I mean, they lived side by side and forever. But back then, the tribes that were in that area were fairly let's just say shy or reluctant to really have much to do with the white men. So did they have dogs? Yeah. Were they around at that time? Yeah. Did one or two of them have a one-night stand? Maybe. But was it enough to say that, yeah, those dogs contributed to the development? I don't think so. I don't think so.
All right. Let's dive into kind of where did I have a second question I want to ask, but let's start with this. So where did the Retriever breeds kind of start? Where did that whole thing kind of kick off? Was it in Labrador or where was it?
Yes. So what we have to do is be careful when we talk about Retriever breeds, because if we use the terminology breeds, and I agree we should, we're talking, at the very earliest, 19 1830s when we talk about a breed, or even later, because the idea of a breed really didn't exist until that particular time. We can talk about what's called a land race. And a land race is just a fancy way of saying a type of dog that develops in a certain particular place. And a lot of the development of the retriever breeds, the ones that we call a retriever, they have retriever in their name. Yeah, that took place in North America, but was perfected or developed in the UK. And I can sort of explain how it went back and forth. But what we also need to realize is that at the same time, or even prior to then, there were dogs used to retrieve. They weren't what we would consider today a retriever breed. They were water dogs. And I mean, I've got an old engraving. It's a beautiful engraving from the early 1600s, just outside of Venice, Italy. Everybody knows Venice. It's the city that has all these canals. Well, to get there, there's a lagoon. It's separated from the main body of the mainland of Italy. And it's sort of this island that's connected by a little causeway. And it's in a lagoon. And that lagoon is still to this day famous for duck hunting. A lot of people still duck hunt there. But back in the day, it was where all the noblemen went and duck hunted. And there is a famous engraving. It's beautiful. And it's one of the very first of people shooting birds flying. They shot them with bows that are called a stone bow. Imagine a bow that doesn't have an arrow, but it's got a pouch on it. And you put stones in it. And you shoot it just like you would a bow and arrow. But it shoots stones. And so they were shooting birds out of the air. And in the water are dogs going to retrieve them. Now, these aren't Labradors, and they were probably fairly hairy, woolly, curly-coated water dogs of that time, but they were around, and they were all over Europe at that time. So we have to be careful when we talk about the retriever breeds as in a capital R retriever breed and other dogs that were used to retrieve, because even their stories intersect in certain ways that we'll probably get to as well. But yeah, Newfoundland Labrador. These are off the east coast of Canada, and they were the number one sort of fishing spots that were developed. I mean, right in the late 1400s. You know, Christopher Columbus never went that far up, but John Cabot did, and John Cabot and his crews on his boats had reports of not being able to row their ships to land because they were blocked by so many damn fish. And the fish were literally so thick in the water they had trouble rowing against them to get to land in their boats. Now, on those boats were dogs. They kept dogs for a number of different reasons. Dogs were kind of ubiquitous on a lot of different types of boats. Some of them were called ship spaniels just because they were there. They would typically also have smaller dogs to control the rat population. But if you're on a fishing vessel, a very useful thing would be a dog that could fetch things for you or drag a line, put a line in its mouth and drag that line from one boat to another, or, be lowered over in a little harness down because three fish, they're dead. They flopped out of the net or the basket you're pulling them up with. You don't want to lose them. Then you lower the dog down, he grabs it in his mouth and you bring him back up. And so that is sort of if we could go in a time machine and go back to, that period of time, we would see that those are the ancestors of the lab, and they would have been all over the map. They would have had all different types of dogs. They would have looked completely different from one ship to the next. But they all shared certain characteristics. They all had certain things in them that allowed them to do their job and to remain on the boat. And when we think about those characteristics, we come right to the essence of the Labrador. Okay? These dogs needed to do, a couple of things. First of all, functionally, they needed to love water, and they needed to be able to swim against strong currents and in cold water. So they needed to be physically able to do it. They needed to have a ton of fetch in them. I mean, this thing's got to be kind of crazy to go over there and fetch something and bring it back. And I can explain where that came from genetically. But the other thing, and this goes right back to what I was talking about in terms of how dogs have wormed their way into our hearts, they had to be very, very cooperative dogs. You're on a boat with like 100 dudes for a year.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And all of them are like living cheek by jowl in these like tiny, in modern standards, they're not very big. Here in Winnipeg, now I don't know if anybody listening lives near some place where they've got an old replica of a boat. So we've got a replica in a museum of, what was there? The Pina, the Nina, and the whatever. The
Santa Maria or something?
The Santa Maria, that's right.
Yeah,
we have a replica of the Nina which is in the museum. So it's a full-size boat inside indoors, and you can go and see this boat. It's pretty spectacular. It's cool to walk around. As a kid, I went 12 times every year in school, probably. But I'll tell you what, man, I mean, the doorways are maybe 5 foot tall. Okay. The bunks are tiny, and they would hot bunk, right? Like, there was, let's say 40 guys, there's 20 bunks. Okay. So basically you're on alternating shifts, right? Now you throw a dog in there. Now, a dog that doesn't get along with people, a dog that wants to quarrel with the other dog, a dog that doesn't want to do his job, well, he ain't getting out of the harbor, man. Like, he's a goner, right? So there was selection pressure right there. They didn't have to sort of say, interview the dogs and find out which one is good. They found out real quick which dog is going to survive. And those are the dogs that had puppies. They had puppies with other dogs. And there you go. So you end up in Newfoundland with incredibly tough dogs, incredibly strong, muscular dogs with a ton of retrieve in them, a ton of fetch in them, but that are also super, super cooperative and able to live very closely with human beings. And that was the main foundation upon which all of the retriever breeds are developed. Because that was the St. John's water dog, basically.
Yeah. So quickly, what breeds kind of came from the St. John water dog?
Anything with the name retriever in its official name.
Oh, so golden, Chessies, all of them. Interesting.
Yeah.
The Toller, was the Toller part of that too, or?
Probably, but maybe. I don't know. I'm going to find out. I'm going to Nova Scotia this fall. I'll find out. But I've done articles on the Toller, but the Toller, no. The Toller comes from a different angle. The Toller is a retriever. It's got retriever in it, but the word before it is tolling.
Yeah.
It's a toller first that also retrieves, and tolling is a whole other thing. And I've got some great stories about tollers. I've even been able to research where tolling came from, and I found an earlier source than I've ever read anywhere before. I was able to dig it up in some old French archives and translate it. But it's actually a French thing. And it was a really cool discovery I made on that particular breed, but it comes from a different idea. Retrieving is a
secondary thing. Yeah, secondary aspect.
Yeah, they're super cool dogs. I love them. But for the St. John's water dog, Chessies, flat coats, which used to be called wavy coats, the curly coat. Now, all of those ones, if you talk to a wavy coat person or a flat coat person and a curly coat person, they'll all say it's never been established or proven. And I'm sure in those camps, there are some people that believe it and some people that don't, that want to sort of create a different history for their breed. But there's no doubt that the St. John's water dog, once the English started taking them back to England, where there was a massive market for them, a developing market, and it was like the timing was just perfect, right? On the one hand, you've got these St. John's water dogs that were super useful in St. John's, Newfoundland, for not only fishing, for hunting too. They were used for hunting. They were used for upland game. They were used for hares. They were used for rabbits, ptarmigan, and seals. But then there was once the locals tried to start sheep farming instead of just fishing and along the coast. They wanted to tame or settle the interior of that area, and so they got sheep. And these are tough ass dogs, man. These are tough dogs, whatnot. And they wanted to go out. They wanted to fetch them sheep. I mean, why not? Everything else, you got a nice looking lamb over there or sheep. Well, I'll just go fetch that for you. So there was a ban put on dogs. There was a quarantine and just a ban. They were forbidden. And so these guys ended up having these incredible dogs that could do all sorts of stuff. Well, some of them would take them back to the UK, back to England. And they found a wanting market. They found a market that was like, oh my God, these dogs do something way better than the ones that we were used to using. These water spaniels and smaller dogs with the curly coat. These dogs are tougher, they're stronger, they're easier to get along with, and they're way easier to train. And that's, and it was also at the time when shooting flying was really getting going. Now we've got shotguns that can shoot grouse on the moors. Now we've got guns that could shoot ducks instead of sitting on the water in flight. They were at the right place at the right time. The St. John's water dog arrived at the right place at the right time for the development of technology, for hunting traditions, and they caught the eye of a couple of really rich dudes who just went to town breeding them. And that's basically how they got started. But yeah, and some of them bred them along Labrador lines, but even prior to that, there were people breeding them along flat-coated lines or curly-coated. The curly-coats probably crossed with the water spaniels that were there. The flat-coateds were undeniably crossed with setters. Same thing with the golden. I mean, there's setter in them because those dogs were popular at the time. There were lots of them around, and some of them were used for retrieving. So why not? So to answer your question, all of them. If it's got a capital R in its name, it came from the St. John's Water Dog. Perhaps the only exception would be the Toller, the Nova Scotia Duck Tolling Retriever. Yeah.
Gotcha. So I loved one thing that you said on the podcast with DU that I would love for you to briefly talk about, and that is where the retrieving desire came from. Because before I heard your podcast, I was like, why the heck do these dogs bring us back stuff instead of just eating it?
Yeah.
You know, like what does that change? And when you explained all the characteristics of all working dogs,
yes,
I was like, wow, that makes so much sense.
Yeah, well, it does. I mean, what we have to do is basically look at a wolf and take it apart and say, what does a wolf do? And look at the actions. And there's a series of actions. It's been codified. It's been studied by, biologists and dog experts. And it's basically a series of steps that this wolf goes through on a typical day to survive. I mean, obviously it wakes up in the morning or it wakes up at some point and it's hungry. I mean, a wolf basically has to eat every day if it can, or eat a huge amount and then maybe go a week without eating. I mean, but its main job in life is looking for food. And then the secondary job is to reproduce, is to have babies that are also going to be looking for food. So it needs to find food. Well, how does a wolf go about finding food? Well, it moves from point A to point B. It's got to find it. It's not going to, it doesn't lay in wait for that, moose to walk by it. It's got to get around and move around. So we call that a search. Pointers and setters have been developed so that they are on search mode from day one. I've seen my friends' little puppies. They're 4 weeks old. And they're just cruising right out of that litter and out of the little whelping box, and they're just looking. They're in search mode all the time. We've developed pointing dogs to have a vast amount of that one trait of a wolf, searching. They've got smaller amounts of everything else. So the next thing, it finds something. Oh, there it is. There's that moose. There's that deer. What am I going to do? Well, oftentimes, if it's a small thing like a mouse or a rabbit, well, it stops for a second. It's got to pause. It's got to look and then leap. Well, that pause. Well, that's the point. And we've taken pointers and setters and other dogs, and we've taken them and made that point. I have dogs here that if they point, you could sit down and have a cup of coffee, man. They ain't going nowhere. That bird ain't going nowhere. That dog ain't going nowhere. There's the old story from England where the guy's dog was so far and he didn't see it. He couldn't find it. And the next year he found its skeleton on point in front of a skeleton of a grouse, right? That's one of these old, sort of famous stories.
I'm sure that one's not quite true.
I have my doubts. But, but that's the point. I mean, even people point. I love telling this one because people could use this as a bar trick. I tell them people point, okay? Because we always pause. So imagine you got a mosquito on your arm or a fly, right? You're going to do this. You're going to go, oh, where are my hands? So you can see them. You're going to go, oh. And then you're going to slap it.
You
right?
pause it. You get ready.
You get ready. Now, do you know what backing is? Anybody who's into pointing dogs will know what backing is. Do you know what when a pointing dog backs another dog? One dog points and it points it. People back. Okay? Test this at the bar next time. You're out having drinks with buddies. Pretend you got a fly on your arm. Just do this. And then look at
everybody else.
They're all pausing. They're all. You can win bar bets, man. I've helped people win a lot of money with that one. But people back because all predatory creatures are going to take that little second or so.
The assessment second, yeah.
Once we develop that into sort of eternal things, then that's a pointing dog, right? All right, so let's say that he does that and he leaps and he kills it. Okay, so that certain dogs, rat terriers and other ones. We've developed little terriers. We've developed rat dogs. We've developed hog dogs and other dogs for that seizing motion. So that's another. You walk around, you rock one, whatever you do, you find something, you pause, you leap on it, and now you kill it. You seize it. So in certain breeds, that is there. It's that shake. My sister's got a little tiny, I don't even know, Shih Tzu of some sort. You give that dog any kind of toy, and she's doing the old death rattle on it. And she's a pet dog. And then the next thing is they take it and they retrieve it. They bring it back. Well, what's the wolf doing? All right, he's done all of that stuff. Why doesn't he eat it? Because he's got young ones in the back. He's got a pack to feed. He's got others. He's sharing it. Retrieving is basically sharing. It's bringing it back to the den. It's saying, look, here's this vast amount of meat. Yeah, sometimes he'll eat the entire thing. He's got to. But you'll see, I saw a video just yesterday. It was taken locally. Somebody posted on a local Facebook thing of a fox with a rabbit out of its mouth. And they were able to film it running hundreds and hundreds of yards right down the middle of the highway. It was neat because a couple of cars stopped just to let the fox through. And the fox had this rabbit. He's got somewhere to go with this rabbit, but there he is. And you know exactly where he's going. I mean, it's June now and he's got a bunch of pups at home. That's what he's doing. He's sharing it. So the retrieving instinct is a distillation. It's a focus on the sharing. And it's so by developing the retriever breeds, we've said, okay, we're going to prioritize that retrieving, that sharing thing, and we're going to minimize as much as possible that shake and kill thing. What's one of the most important characteristics of a really good retriever is a soft mouth. The last thing we want it to do is crunch the heck out of that bird or whatever it's fetching and disembowel it or ruin the meat. We want to not only share it, but share it gently. I got a buddy who trains his Drathars to fetch raw eggs. He said that's not even the hardest. I said, what's the hardest? He said, raw eggs he said, but there's one step, a potato chip.
That's just their lips.
Could you imagine training your dog to hold a big old Lay's potato chip without cracking it? And that's what he insists on doing, right? He's like, holy smoke. But yeah, that's
sharpening a specific breed. Yeah. Man, that's so good. I mean, I love that sharing aspect. When you said that on that episode, I was like, wow. It was like a light bulb moment. But what I really liked, and we probably don't have time to get into it too much right now, because I want to get into how the breed was developed in Europe and how it was named and all that. Like, I want to make sure we cover that. But what I loved about it is that you talked about how they were all on this island and they were just self-producing without much, guidance from mankind. It was just a natural selection of, well, this dog, I don't like this dog, I get rid of this dog.
Yes.
And so my only question was, how long were they on the island before that ban happened?
Hundreds of years.
They were just hundreds of years.
Hundreds.
And they were on the how big was this island? Is it St. John? Is it Newfoundland
it's Newfoundland. So St. John's is the capital of Newfoundland and Labrador. So Newfoundland and Labrador, if you go back far enough, first of all, we're going to realize that the name Labrador comes from a Portuguese. It's named after a Portuguese sailor on one of the boats that was from Portugal at that particular time. And his name was John. And we don't know if it's his last name. Was it Labrador, which means farmer or landowner? It's the same root from the word laborer, someone who labors, so a working man. And I love the name for the breed because it's a working breed, and even its name harkens back to this idea of being a hard-working dog. And so at that time, Labrador included even parts in the Portuguese people's mind and their map makers' minds. It included parts of Greenland. And then it also included all of Newfoundland and Labrador, but then it got sort of divided into different regionalities. And finally, today, what we have is the island of the island of Newfoundland and Labrador, which is on the mainland part of Canada next to Quebec. And they're huge. I mean, Labrador and Newfoundland, Newfoundland is probably the size of half the eastern United States. I mean, it's big. It's probably the size of 3 or 4 eastern Atlantic states. And Labrador is similar size. So it's huge, but very sparsely populated. Most of the population lives on Newfoundland or in Newfoundland, most of them in St. John's and then around the coast. And then Labrador is very sparsely populated as well. But yeah, the dogs were there for, when did the first ones come? I don't know. But you have to imagine back in the day, if you're a breeder today, I guarantee you've got a fence. Okay. Yeah. At some point in your breeding career, you need a fence. Imagine a world with no fences. Like there was no fences there. Like chain link. No, they were just dogs. And guys were living on boats. They were living on the shore. They were working their asses off. And the dogs were simply, half wild, I would think at times, but descendant from dogs that lived on boats and lived with them and were, again, highly cooperative dogs. Again, this is that whole thing. You got this hungry dog and a fish falls overboard and you go fetch that and don't eat it there, boy. And he's like, okay, buddy, I'll bring it back up to you, you know? And so that cooperative relationship is centuries old. And so as a landrace, all right, you're going to start with all kinds of dogs. You're going to have little ones, big ones, small ones, you know, fat ones, skinny ones, long, whatever. You got all the different colors of the rainbow. You've got curly coats, long coats, short coats, but you're basically putting them into like a blast furnace. You're basically putting them through a grinder. Which are the ones that are going to survive? Newfoundland winters are unbelievably hard. And a lot of these guys would leave. They would just go get the hell out of there. You know, they would come for
the dogs would stay.
Some of them, but a lot of them would go with them. They would come for the fishing season and whatnot. But those that ended up having those camps, those fishing camps and whaling camps and sealing camps and all those sorts of things, imagine the conditions. I mean, these are not only tough dogs, these are tough dudes. I mean, the men, and it was mainly men that were there at that time, were, you know, the fittest of the fit, because if you weren't, you just didn't make it. You know what I mean? The death rate and the accident rate and the rate at which these guys must have burned out would have been incredible. So they were all young men, probably overseen by pretty darn harsh, you know, taskmasters. And their dogs reflected that. Their dogs simply reflected that they were survivors in this incredibly difficult area that required, again, I keep coming back to this, those men needed each other. You couldn't survive there on your own. Those dogs needed those men needed those dogs. It was a highly cooperative type of environment that everybody had to pull through. If not, you're screwed. And so from that came this root stock of these dogs that went back to England. You know, it's probably like those men that went back too. A lot of those men would have lived in cities, not necessarily at a harbor, but somewhere, and they were poor. And some of them probably even got dragooned. The captain needed 40 new men on his thing. They just went into the town and got the poorest guys that are out on the road. Like, I mean, they're not having big recruitment posters and they're not sort of, you know, advertising these jobs. They're just dragging people and putting them there. Some of these guys probably never saw a boat before they got on one. None of them could swim, which is another thing that really helped the development of the retriever breeds, is that men didn't swim back then. They didn't learn how, they didn't know how, they didn't want to. Well, you fall overboard on one of these ships heading to the New World or back, that ship ain't turning around, dude. It's not coming back to get you. They're not throwing anything over, you know, to save you. There's no lifeboats. There's nothing. Learning to swim is learning to prolong the agony, basically. So none of them swam. So there again, the dog fulfilled a need that they had for this. And I can imagine that some of these men, you know, were probably 14 years old, 13 when they got pulled off the street, or because they're poor as dirt, decided to get on the ship and go. Well, after 2 or 3 voyages out there, you come back, you're now 19, 21, 30, you know, even 30 years old, and you're, dude, you survived all that. You're going to be a hard ass MF, man. Like, you are going to be a tough son of a bitch. And so is your dog. And so now we see in the 1800s, the early 1800s, late 1700s, hunting and shooting. The upper classes in England are doing it more and more. We've got guns that are light enough to shoot birds flying. And you're, you know, hoity-toiting around your little place, and you've got this little dog that you might have trained a little bit. That might go fetch a goose if you're lucky or whatever. And then all of a sudden, a shipload of these Newfie guys come over, of these guys that have spent years on boats and in Newfoundland come over, and they walk in with just rippling abs, I can imagine. I mean, these are hard-ass people that are coming back after all this time. And what do they have with them? Unbelievable dogs that make your dog look like a lazy lump of nothing. And so, yeah, you're going to be selling those dogs. You're going to have buyers lining up for those dogs. And then once they got their hands on them, the English were brilliant. They had already perfected breeds of horses. They were perfecting cow breeds, sheep breeds. These were the best breeders of livestock in the world. They like pigeon breeders, fancy pigeons, fancy chickens. It was a huge thing back in the day to have your own little line of whatever it was. There were contests for pigeons and chickens and goats and pigs and all that sort of stuff. Well, throw in these unbelievable dogs. It doesn't take them long, man. It doesn't take them long. If you've got the money and you've got the wherewithal and you've got the desire, you've got this incredible foundation. You've got this raw material coming from this land that just blast furnace them into existence, and then you mold it. You mold it to exactly what you want. And it doesn't take long before your dogs are entering field trials, and nobody even knew what they were at first. Nobody had ever seen some of these dogs. And in the first year they ever enter, after all these other dogs have been winning for years, they clean up. They dominate. They make those other dogs look they just blow the tires off those other dogs.
And was this the point that they were Labradors, or were they just Retrievers at this?
They were Labradors by then. By the time the trials first started, they were Labradors, but they were kind of unknown. You know, Croxton Smith, who was one of the greatest authors and greatest sort of chroniclers of dogs at that time, I have a quote from him. Where is it here? So he said, in 1903 was a memorable history for Labradors, which had before then been little known except among a few elected sporting families. He said, I must admit that before 1903, I had never seen one. This is Croxton Smith. This is the number one chronicler of dogs in the UK at that time. And he had never even seen one prior to that. They were they were in the hands of a couple of very well-to-do families, and there were others around, but they hadn't really been, celebrated as an official breed. But then they were at the Crystal Palace. A couple of them were shown at a big dog show, and dog shows at that time were huge. And they were the place where, like today they have the Met Gala where all the people that are rich have the fancy clothes. That's what dog shows were back at the day, especially at the Crystal Palace in London. If you were someone and you wanted to be seen, you went to this. Well, then I think it was 1904 or 5. Labradors all of a sudden showed up at the show, and people were like, what are these things? These are pretty neat looking dogs. Although, no, I shouldn't say that. They said, what are these things? We've never seen one, but we don't like the look of them. They look ordinary.
They look ordinary.
They don't look noble. They don't look like what we're used to seeing. In other words, they look common is what the term they would have used. They look low class or common. Well, duh. They just got off a boat 50 years ago from Newfoundland. It'd be like me and you showing up at Windsor Castle tomorrow. We'd be looking pretty common, in T-shirts and ball caps. But then the lab people showed them in field trials, and it shut those people the hell up. I mean, they went, okay. They smoked them in the field trials. They in the very first ones that they ran in, they won a couple of placements. And then the next year, I think they won all of the placements. They just dominated. And then that's when you saw the curly coat and the flat coat, their numbers just dropped. Because anybody who was into training these dogs and looking at these dogs and trialing them looked and thought, okay, I'm immediately jumping onto those things. Hey, a similar thing happened in North America. I mean, Chessies and Irish Water Spaniels dominated, or they were the dogs, and setters were actually used for a lot of retrieving stuff. Once the Labrador got off to a great start in North America, it wasn't long until it was like 90% labs. To this day, I photographed the Canadian National Field Trial Championship here north of my city. There were only labs. There was no other breed. It's just 100% labs.
Did you get a good photo of Floyd?
Floyd was an unbelievable dog. I did. Yeah. I got an unbelievable photo of Floyd.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I just bred to Floyd, so I'm like, I got a little 9-month-old Floyd girl. But anyway.
Dude, let me send I'll private. I'm going to send you a picture of Floyd because I got him. I was going to say I got Floyd in full flight. Floyd don't fly, man. Floyd is all about Floyd. He is just the coolest dog, and it was just obvious from the start, in my eyes anyway, that this dog has just got it in spades. Just wonderful dog. And then the Canadian amateur, the winner for the amateur stake, was a dog named Rocket, and I got to hunt with him last fall. I went out grouse and woodcock hunting with Floyd, with Rocket, and fantastic dogs all around. Yeah.
So, man, there's so much we could talk about. You said something about the Labrador started to take over. What you said the statistics? It was like there's a bunch of flat coats that were running, and then the labs started taking over. I remember you said in the podcast that it was like a pretty demanding difference. Like it was like 90% or something that What was this? What was the numbers? Do you have those?
Yeah, I've got one right here. So this is a little part I wrote in an article. I said labs gained acceptance and won ribbons in the show ring, but they were also making great strides in field trials. So, for example, in 1908, there were 106 dogs entered in the retriever field trials. Labs were outnumbered 2-1 by flatcoats. So there were twice as many flatcoats as labs. But labs won the vast majority of all the stakes. By 1913, the difference was even greater, with labs outpacing all of the retriever breeds and winning all of the titles.
So at that point, no other breed won. It was all retrievers for the retriever.
Yeah, by
trials.
like about 1920s in the UK, yeah, you could. The occasional flatcoat might have won here or there, but in the big, major stakes, it was it was kind of an overnight thing, really. It really didn't take them long. And one of the things that I found interesting about that was how the reports are. Like, so you can read some of the reports from those field trials. And one of the really cool ones was how the first time they talk about a gentleman, and I should have it here somewhere anyway, they talk about a gentleman who won the stake with his Labrador, a very good Labrador, and he won him by using a whistle. It was new at the time. Like, this is one of the first times, and he was using a shepherd's whistle, like that they would use for border collies. And that was one of the things that really impressed the judges. This guy, all he had to do was make the mildest, quietest little tweet on his whistle, and the dog would respond instantly. And they found that like incredibly impressive. And that, and I've spoken to people in the UK about that and why labs always win. And even here at the championships, it's because labs ended up being super reliable. They were dependable. It wasn't a case of showing up at the trial and wondering what dog is going to get out of the truck that day. They were just, you could set your watch compared to the other breeds, which were sometimes finicky and fussy, and one day would be brilliant, and then the next day would just kind of fall apart or just be like they were flaky. And what they found with the labs was that there was way less flakiness in them. And so if you were eager to win trials and you were eager to impress the judges with a dog that could perform day in, day out to the same high standard, well, once you got that, there's no way you're going back to these other breeds that on a good day are fantastic, but on a not so good day, they embarrass you. So that's really why labs took over, because of that hyper cooperative, intense, focused, able to figure out and just laser focus on the job to be done and not be flaky, basically.
Yeah. So to speed this up a little bit, to get to coming to America, which I know you started to talk about.
Yeah.
I've done a couple podcasts on the difference between the British Lions and the American Lions. And just to summarize that really quickly for those that are listening, one of the big separators is just, what they were, the continental tower shooting, being more land dominant in all those trials. You had the British dogs that, they would get wet, but it was a little bit, it wasn't the same as when the field trials in America started to happen.
Yes.
And we're much more duck hunters, right? And so we're sitting over water. And the American trials obviously have a mix. In a typical weekend field trial, we have a land triple or a land setup. Then you have a land blind, water blind, and then a water triple. That's the core functionality of a weekend field trial. But let's go back, talk about how did the field trial game really start in America, or the Labrador coming into that into the field trial game?
So retriever field trials started in around the 1930s in America. And just like the field trials for pointers and setters, they were based on British rules. So if you go back to the 1870s and the very first trials for pointers and setters, they looked the exact same here as they did in England. The handlers did the same thing. Judges looked for the same thing. Dogs worked in the same way. 1930s, the very first retriever trials, well, they were basically mimicking the exact same thing that was happening in England at that time or in the UK at that time. Over time, however, they changed. And as you pointed out, it's because of differences in hunting cultures And that is also to say that even in the UK, their retriever trials have changed as well. They've also become a little more complicated and a little bit more demanding of their dogs. But they are more or less mimicking an upland rough shooting day or a walked up shooting sort of a thing. I mean, the dogs must retrieve in certain ways, but it's not like the Americans setting up, North American way of setting up, the double blinds and the triple blinds and a very, complicated sequence of events that the Labradors must do. But basically, what happened was the American way started taking off, and Americans, and when I say Americans, I mean North Americans. I'm Canadian, but we're and especially my brothers and sisters south of the border are very competitive people, and they want to be, they want to have, they want to set the demands at a very, very high level. Now, so do my colleagues over in the UK. It's just that the demands are slightly different, and they're based on culture. All right, and I'm going to give you a couple of examples. In America, you're going to see extremely complicated things that dogs have to do. I mean, again, you mentioned Floyd and I mentioned Rocket, and every dog I saw at that child, because this is the Nationals, right? So this is the best of the best. You see these dogs, and it's jaw-dropping what these dogs can do. I mean, absolutely amazing. And Peter, the owner of Rocket, said at the end, he goes, in his little speech that he gave after he won the award, he said, "What I seek is the sublime. I seek that the difference between excellent and perfection. I want that razor's edge of just that's something you can't describe." And I asked people, the lab people and the judges, what are you looking for? They go, "I can't describe it to you, but I know it when I see it. I'm just looking for the sublime, for that little extra something or other." And it came about because the dogs got so good. The first trials, if you ran a dog today, a top level dog today in a trial with the exact same rules they had in the 1930s, you'd think it would be a cakewalk in the park. It was just ridiculously easy compared to what it is today. The things they do today, if you went back to the 30s and told somebody back then that your dog could do this, that, and the other thing, they would laugh in your face. "What are you talking about? You mean go over there and, in a straight line? Why a straight line? You know what I mean? And mm-hmm. Why does it have to avoid? Why does it have to go, on the tip of this and not jump in there's a lot of subtleties to the American way of doing things. And it's because the precision is valued, the obedience, the cooperation, the precise nature of what they're doing is super important in the actual act of doing what they're doing, of completing the job. Again, we are very job focused. We are very oriented on goals. The goal is for that dog to do X, Y, Z in this particular way, and any deviance from that will be dinged and you won't win. Now, what happens before and after isn't really important. What happens on the job is what's important. What you do after the job isn't important. So the big example I give is if you go to an American Retriever trial, you're not particularly surprised to hear a dog back in the parking lot or the area, not on the line, obviously, or even on the line, you'll hear a little whimper once in a while. And back in the parking lot, you might hear a couple of dogs barking away or making some noise.
Trying to eat each other in the trailer or whatever.
And nobody bats an eye at that because that's not being judged. That's just, hey, no. Once that dog is on the line, I am looking for I am laser focused on its laser focus. I am looking to see the precision and the sublime in that particular performance. I want to judge the performance and not what happens in the green room behind scenes, right? In England, it's different. Everything is kind of judged, and the dog's demeanor and the handler's demeanor and what happens before, during, after. And so, and little subtleties. So for instance, we put a huge amount of emphasis on memory, right? The dog has to remember exactly and go in the most efficient order, or which way it was sent, and then obey the whistle and sit. Again, they want obedience. They have obedience in England, but they'll also look at other things like, was that dog noisy? Was that dog there's just subtleties that are they're cultural. They're just little cultural things. I asked my friend, I said, why are the dogs so quiet? She goes, well, because a dog that isn't quiet just isn't here. I go, well, what do you mean? Is there a rule? She goes, there's no specific rule about it, but basically you'd get a whole lot of side eye if your dog even whimpered. She said, you wouldn't come back due to embarrassment. You would simply be just too ashamed to come back because you'd have all these people looking at you a little bit, hey, that's not so good. Whereas here, that's not the case. So the reason that trials differentiated is because we emphasize different things than the Brits emphasize. But what we emphasize and what they emphasize gets honed to a fine point. Like, again, I've seen dogs over in the UK that are just, again, mind-blowing in what they do. And same thing here in America. They're mind-blowing. Now, an American who has never seen one of their trials might not understand what they're doing. And same thing, the Brits. They'll watch some of the videos online and they'll ask me, like, well, hang on, why are they so obsessed with this? Or why do they insist on the dog doing that? And once I explain, they're like, oh, okay, I get it. But whatever you prioritize, whatever you focus on, and then base your breeding decisions on, that's what you're going to end up with. You end up getting those dogs. In America, we have dogs that have an incredible amount of power. Just, these are the most muscular, fast dogs and powerful. In Britain, they're less... I shouldn't say that. They're strong dogs, man. They're powerful dogs, but in a different way. They're not as explosive power, I would say.
Yeah. My buddy who I train with, he has British dogs, and he does an American field trials and just got a third in a qualifier, which is a lower stakes, but still, you can do it. But I do. I have a whole podcast with one of the top British breeders where we just have an unfiltered discussion about it, and it's awesome because. It's still like one of those videos like on YouTube. It just like keeps coming back and keeps getting tons and tons of views. But we really dive into that. And what I loved about all your research, what I love about it is it just shows the selection process.
It does.
From the very beginning. And that's all that we're doing is we're just continually selecting and choosing the dogs that fit with the work that we want to do. And that's why you have those two divergence, just because based on the cultures and the work that these dogs are doing. In your research, do you dive into much with the Goldens and Chessies, which are the other two main breeds in Retriever, or are you focusing mostly on the Lab?
I'm starting on all of them right now. So my next book is called Retrievers, Spaniels, and Water Dogs, because they're all sort of related and they all go back to similar sources. But so I've been diving a little bit into the Chessie lately because there's a local Chessie that I want to set up a photo shoot. So I want to learn more. I've done more research, for example, on the Toller, Nova Scotia duck tolling retriever, the Golden. My cousin has one, and I get to photograph that one once in a while. But I'm starting those. So I'm still early days, I must say, in my research in some of these breeds. And the way I start is I begin with. I begin with original sources, all right? Of course, I'm going to read Richard Walter's books. Of course, I'm going to read all of the modern sort of texts on those, and I take those in stride. But what I try and do, and nowadays, because of the glory of the internet, man, I'm telling you, there are archives out there where I have access to, for example, the National Library of France has every single magazine and newspaper of the sporting years on file that you can read for free online. I mean, there's just decades of like tens of thousands or millions, I would say, of pages of stuff that I can read through. And it's the same thing with the British newspaper archives. So I now have access to all, like I could find, there's a magazine called The Field. It's still published today, but it was published every week starting in the 1840s, 30s, going up to the modern day. And I have access to all of the old issues of that. And so what I love to do now, and so what I was doing with the Chessie, just recently, I found a really cool article or a book. A lot of these old books that are written by hunters for hunters back in the day, hunting stories from the prairies of Canada or hunting stories from the Atlantic. There's this one where this guy was writing about his Chessie and how he told with it. So just to refresh some of your listeners, if they don't know, tolling just means a dog that the hunter is hidden and the dog plays along the shore typically. And typically it's a dog like a toller that looks like a fox. And for some reason, nobody knows why, but birds are attracted. Ducks and geese that might be in a raft 200 yards out of gun range will literally swim towards the dog because they're curious. And then once they're in range, you stand up, the ducks fly, you shoot, and the dog fetches it. Well, this guy talks about a Chessie doing that in a field with geese. It's in the late 1800s. I think it's in New Jersey or New York. I'd have to look it up, state. And he lay down in a small depression in a ditch, and he had his dog just run back and forth. And all these geese were feeding in a field, and they started walking up towards him, just walking, until finally they got close enough, and he stood, they flew, he shot, and he got his geese. And so I just thought it was a cool story that, we think about the Chessie as being this dog going into the waves off of a rocky cliff and, picking up the eider ducks and these big diving ducks off the eastern coast. But no, this dude was using them for hunting geese in a field somewhere and tolling them,
Yeah. That's a combination of a lot of different things right there.
Right?
Man, that's great. Well, is there any other just interesting facts about, the Labrador or any of the retrieving breeds that hey, just not a lot of people know this, but you found this really interesting. It'd be good for people just to hear it.
I think maybe I don't think people realize just how popular these dogs are. And it's not just in America. It's kind of everywhere. Like there are European countries in which, the number one breed is the Labrador Retriever, and there are places far away that it's basically you're going to be able to find a lab everywhere. And I think that that's the other thing too, that people need to really understand about when we talk about the Labrador Retriever. Everybody has their idea of what it is in mind, and they're right in a way that everybody sort of has what it looks like, but you've already touched on it. There's a difference between the British and the American ones, but there's basically a lab for everybody out there. You can find the kind of lab that will perfectly suit you, your hunting style, your needs, your wants, with a bit of research. And just like every breed, if you do your homework correctly, you will find a dog that you will love and have a great time afield with. If you don't do your homework and are a little rash in your decisions, you might end up with something that is either too much or not enough for what you want in a dog. So, I would say that I think that people underestimate the variety that there is within the lab breed itself. And they underestimate how much time they really should invest in finding the right dog for them. There was a study done once that showed that people put in more hours of research when they purchase a dishwasher than when they purchase a dog.
Oh my gosh, us retriever folks, us field trial and hunt test people, we probably skew that data slightly one way.
As do I.
But I get it that most people don't. I found this dog. My cousin had one. I just grabbed it.
Well, and see, that's one of the things that happens when we attach a name to a breed, or we declare a breed. It's almost like because breeds were created at a time when we wanted to have uniformity, and that when the Industrial Revolution was coming, we put brand names on things because it could be the same. Prior to that, everything was different. Everything was handmade, so every individual plate on your table was different from the other ones. But then stamping came along and industrial stuff came along. Well, why not dogs? We're going to make dogs like peas in a pod. They're all going to be the same. That's what the standard says. If we all followed the standard and all did the same thing, they would be clones of each other. Well, we know that they're not. In fact, they're the furthest thing from clones. There is a massive amount of variety within these breeds. And when people find just the right dog for themselves, they are going to find a perfect partner. But Labrador is a pretty catch-all term. I mean, it's a retriever breed, but people treat it as like if you go out and buy a Chevy or a Ford 150, a 2023 Ford 150 with this motor is the same as your neighbors of the same year. I mean, there's very little difference. Well, that's not what labs are. That's not what dog breeds are. They're quite different. And I am one of the first to say, I get this probably every week. I'll get an email or a text or something of somebody looking for a dog. Okay. Typically they've decided on one or two different breeds of dogs, and I can help them, weigh the pros and the cons. But if I'm a newbie kind of a hunter, I'm a young person, or I'm a young guy or a young woman with a family and a couple of kids, I hunt ducks once in a while and geese. Maybe I'll go hunt grouse and woodcock once in a while. And I really don't know what dog to get. 9 times out of 10, man, it's a lab. I'm telling them, because that's a great first dog to get. You could probably find one relatively close to home. You can find one that's going to have the personality and the amount of drive that suits your amount of drive. So, yeah, maybe that's it. Maybe what I'm going to tell people is kind of obvious, but maybe they need to be reminded that the lab folks, you got it going on, man. You've got a good thing. Don't screw it up.
Yeah.
Don't ruin
Yeah.
it. But no, you are, consider yourselves lucky. That's what I'm going to tell you is that lab people, I don't think, realize how lucky they really are in terms of what they've got on their hands and the depth and width of that breed that you could find. You could make anybody happy if they get the right lab, is what I would say.
Very good. Well, Craig, as we wrap this up, why don't you give the listeners ways that they can learn more about what you're doing and how to contact you?
So the best way is my website. It's pretty simple. It's called Dog Willing, all one word, DOGWILLING, dogwilling.ca, because I'm in Canada. And if you go there, you can find links to everything. I write books mainly on pointing dogs. Again, I'm writing this one on retrievers, spaniels, and water dogs. It should be out. My first book took 12 years to write, okay? My second book took 11. So don't expect this tomorrow morning, but I've promised myself that I want to get this out within a year to 18 months. I'm working very hard, and I'm not going to travel as much for this particular book. So I'm going to try and get it out faster. It should be out soon enough. I sell them through my website. I also sell books through Project Upland in the US. I write for Project Upland, and I have a podcast. I should invite you on my podcast at one point there, Chris. It's called Hunting Dog Confidential. As I get closer to publishing the book and completing it, I'll get you on and we'll talk retrievers. We'll talk retriever trials, and we'll talk about all those complexities that still baffle me to this day. I don't train my dogs. I hunt with them. They do what I need them to do. They go out, pick it up, and bring it back. But to sit down and think, how can I get my dog to go to 3 different places in a particular order in a straight line and not do this? Yeah, that blows my mind. You'll have to explain that to me one day.
Yeah. Well, when I have it figured out, that'll really be dangerous.
It's still a work in progress for you.
Oh my goodness. Well, everything, that's why I love doing this podcast, because I get to talk to all these influential trainers. And there's little tiny nuances there. Dog training, especially retriever training, the more and more I get, you start and you think it's like color by numbers, right? I do this, then I do this, and this is how it works. And I'm realizing that there is some sequencing to how a dog learns, and you develop the way that you like to teach dogs, and you have to adapt it based on the dog's personality. But it is way more art than people realize. It's so much more art, and there's the ability to read what a dog is thinking.
Yes.
And then applying the proper intervention, whether that's positive or negative, I think is the quest that we're all on.
I think you're right. I think you nailed it. And I think that this goes exactly back to how we started this. I think the Labrador is so successful today because it's probably the easiest, or at least the most connected dog brain to brain wise. In other words, I think that's what they found out. When all of a sudden these dogs came along, and it was as if they had this telepathic ability to understand each other way easier than the other breeds. That's, I think, why they took over. Like you say, when you try and figure out what's going on in that dog's brain, I think the Labrador is the one that has the least, or the easiest barrier to get over. Why? Because it came out of a place where it was living on ships and in the hardest environment you could possibly imagine. You better be close. You better be like that with your people in those situations. And so, yeah, I think that you've nailed it. I think that's the essence of the Labrador Retriever right there, is the ability to meld minds with those dogs.
Yeah, man, that's beautiful. Well, as we wrap this up, I want to make sure I thank our sponsors once again. Thank you to Man's Best Friend Calls. Check them out at mbfcalls.com if you're looking to get a duck call or a goose call with a good picture of your long lost partner. We talked about all throughout today's episode, talking about how much investment we have in them and they have in us. If you're looking for a great token as a memorial, check out mbfcalls.com. Craig, once again, man, thank you for joining me. It's been a blast.
Chris, it's been a real pleasure. And to all of your listeners out there, give your dog a biscuit for me, will you?
Will do.
All right.